All right, 15 minutes moving away from the hour. It's now time for our weekly featured program, Policing with You. And in the studio with me this morning, as usual, well, rotating, I should say. This morning we have Superintendent Francis. Good morning to you, sir.
Pleasant good morning, GQ. Pleasant good morning to everyone out there in the listening and viewing audience. Welcome to another program of Policing with You. I have in the studio with me Mr. Gwenville Williams, attorney at law and director of the Asset Recovery Unit at the Regional Security Systems, RSS, and Sergeant Randy Alexander, Regional Police Financial Investigation Advisor. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, and good morning to all the listeners here in St. Kitts and Nevis, listeners across the region, and any persons listening in the diaspora. It is a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody.
Yes, morning, sir. Welcome, gentlemen. I know you guys took time off from a course that you guys are having right now to just come on the program and lend us up some information and intelligence. I'm just going to jump straight into the questions so you can enlighten the listening and viewing audience. What is the role and function of the Regional Security System, RSS?
Thank you very much for that question. The RSS, or the Regional Security System, it is headquartered in Barbados, but it comprises 7 jurisdictions, 6 Eastern Caribbean countries, along with Barbados, as I mentioned. The mission of the RSS is to ensure the stability and well-being of the member states, the people in the Eastern Caribbean. And this is done through mutual cooperation as it relates to security issues. We hope to foster and encourage economic and social development of the RSS member states. The role and function of the RSS specifically began in the 1970s and 1980s. The region faced certain threats, whether those were political, social, or economic. We are small countries. Our populations are small. Our forefathers, therefore, had the vision to understand that we are going to be stronger together rather than apart. We could pool our resources. So in 1982, 4 countries, namely Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they signed a memorandum of understanding with Barbados to engage in cooperation, mutual assistance upon request as it relates to security matters. Later in 1983, when St. Kitts and Nevis gained independence, they joined the RSS. Since then, we've been able to collaborate and offer assistance in a number of security areas. And this is varied. So we're able to offer assistance in looking at the maritime domain, strengthening your Coast Guard, strengthening the capacity to patrol, looking at the influx or the inflow of weapons into the region, including St. Kitts and Nevis, and what mechanisms that we could offer collectively to try and stem the flow of those weapons. In today's time, we have morphed and developed to move with the times. We have modern threats, so those threats could include cyber. So we have the Training Institute that offers training and development opportunities for officers as well as criminal justice practitioners so that we could effectively address some of those threats. We also offer assistance in terms of digital forensics. Right now, everyone uses a mobile device. Everyone. So we leave a lot of digital footprints. In order for us to effectively ensure that our security is cutting edge, our security is effective in dealing with modern threats, we offer training and development as it relates to that specific area. We also, at the RSS headquarters, provide a digital forensics lab. So that lab, if you're having technical difficulties in your jurisdiction, examining a device, whether that's a phone or computer, it could be sent to the lab. At the lab, persons from St. Kitts and Nevis in the relevant department could also come and undertake a secondment program, therefore building their capacity, coming back to St. Kitts and Nevis, and offering their continued service to law enforcement and the criminal justice system here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Our role, we are the Asset Recovery Unit, and we are one of the more recent additions to the RSS. And eventually, I think we'll have an opportunity to speak about the role and functions of the Asset Recovery Unit. But in a snapshot, those are some of the functions. and the roles of the regional security system. But ultimately, it's about mutual cooperation, ensuring that we pool our resources, and putting forward a message that we are stronger together. And if we continue to cooperate, then we could make this region safer and better for all the citizenry of our countries.
Thank you very much. That was really a good explanation. So, in a nutshell, Sengis is not alone in this fight against crime.
No, far from.
Far from being alone. Okay, let's jump into the next question. What about the asset recovery unit? As you indicated, can you explain to the listening and viewing audience what are the role and function of that unit?
All right, thank you very much. The Asset Recovery Unit forms part of the RSS. In our region, we are expected to implement measures to combat money laundering, combat terrorist financing, as well as proliferation financing. Those are based on the FATF 40 recommendations. In each jurisdiction, we do have institutions, whether it's an FIU, a white collar crime unit, a police department, that address these issues. But what the RSS offers is a center of excellence where you have a team of lawyers, you have a team of financial investigators, you have a team of administrative staff who brings a wealth of experience in dealing with asset recovery, financial investigation, money laundering, proliferation financing, terrorist financing, and we are able to cascade that experience throughout the 7 member states of the RSS. How do we do that? We offer a number of opportunities: capacity building and development, training for persons in the law enforcement and criminal justice sector. We offer assistance in strengthening the legislative framework, amending legislation, upgrading legislation, legislative reform. We also offer opportunities for persons to be seconded to the RSS Asset Recovery Unit, where they can sharpen their skills and gather experience from the 7 member states. We are also able to bring in additional resources, because the resource personnel at the AIU may not know everything, but we may know someone who has an answer to something. So we are able to mobilize those human resources to offer the best product to the RSS member state. But ultimately, what we are hoping is that we would be able to build the domestic institutions, the FIUs, the white collar crime unit, the police departments, the criminal justice practitioners, the DPP AG, to the level where they can effectively investigate proceeds of crime and asset recovery matters, prosecute those matters, and our objective is to remove from the hands of criminals any assets they would have obtained from criminality. So we also want to sharpen their skills in being able to effectively utilize any tools available under whether it's proceeds of crime legislation, money laundering legislation, or other existing legislation such as the criminal code to recover such assets.
Okay, thank you. I have a next question, but to piggyback on what you said, just for the listening audience, when we say asset recovery, what are we really recovering? In a layman's term, an 18-year-old son might need to understand, what is asset? What are we trying to recover? What is that all about? Asset recovery.
Good morning to the listeners. It's a pleasure to be here again. I think asset recovery entails, in layman's terms,
yes,
whatever you could identify as an asset. And again, you have to look at your legislation, because it will be a guide. But from property to cash,
who are you recovering it from?
vehicles, to vehicles,
sorry, go ahead.
to vehicles, and any other tangible, intangible, corporeal property. So from stocks and bonds to interest in stocks and bonds,
Wow.
and all of these, like the name asset recovery indicates, has to be traced back to an illicit origin or an illegal origin. So in essence, the criminal or the ill-gotten property that the organization or the criminal individual would be in possession of, or whether or not he's in direct possession or constructive possession, as in it's in somebody else's name.
Wow.
These are the assets that we're looking for. These are the assets that we're going to more or less extract from their hands, because again, you see is a revolving door effect where they go to prison and they still maintain control of those houses, cars, bank accounts, jewelry, and come back, and it's a form. It's more or less a form of value, so they could continue. So it's in short term, it's just removing all of these assets or this valuable property from their possession.
If I may interject and
Yes,
add
please.
here, we are speaking about criminal activity.
Criminal activity.
Persons who engage in crime. In the majority of instances, it would be persons who have had their day before the court, and the judicial authorities or jury may have found that they are guilty of committing a crime. Having been found guilty, there are mechanisms that says you should not be allowed to benefit from your criminal conduct.
Understand.
Because most crimes are committed because the person wants to benefit from that crime. On the outskirts here, there are some crimes of passion. A spouse may get into a battle, get into a fight. That's a crime of passion. Someone may kill someone in a rage. That's a crime of passion. But if you're hired to shoot someone and you're paid, that's a business because you're generating income from that criminality. If you are selling narcotics, illegal drugs, you are generating money from the sale. If you engage in robbery, theft, any property crimes, you are generating money. If you engage in corruption, you are generating money.
Wow.
And ultimately, we go to work, the majority of us in society, from 8 to 5 to simplify it,
Why?
and we get up every day. And we earn our just rewards.
Yes, yes.
Those persons who involve themselves in criminality are operating outside of the law. And if we allow them to keep the benefit from their criminality, then what we are saying to society is that we should not work hard, we should not go to school and become educated, because I could simply become engaged in a life of crime and I would benefit. So the mechanisms in the legislation when we speak about asset recovery, as Randy said, any property that you obtain as a result of criminal conduct, whether directly or indirectly, we want to take from you, the criminal, to send a message to society
Yes.
that crime does not pay. So ultimately, no one should be allowed to benefit from their criminal conduct.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Very, very much. I think my 18-year-old son would understand. So basically, I'm glad to hear this, because I'm glad to know that St. Kitts is on the bandwagon with this. Because, we live in society and you see Joe around the road, not working anywhere, probably liming down the road, and you hear that he's selling some crack. Next thing you look, you see he got a big house, he got a nice car, nice Jeep, 4-wheel bike, and nobody taking away that. And
Exactly.
he got it illegally.
Exactly. So in St. Kitts and Nevis, you do have a powerful piece of legislation called the Proceeds of Crime Law that allows law enforcement to conduct their investigations where they're able to gather sufficient evidence, prosecute that person, and ultimately take away that house on the hill,
Yes.
take away that SUV,
Yes.
take away that boat
Yes.
that they would have obtained from their criminality. So that is what we want to focus on, and that is what we are conducting training on with law enforcement and criminal justice practitioners during our week here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Beautiful, beautiful. We want people to earn things honestly.
Legitimately.
Exactly. Okay, where the proceeds of crime legislation is concerned, what is the rationale for such a legislation?
Well, the
We
rationale,
basically touched on it a little
yeah, the
bit.
rationale goes back to the fact that we should be sending a message that no one should be allowed to benefit from their criminal conduct. If we allow persons to have the big house on the hill, have the SUV, have the boat, and the 4-wheel, whatever it is that they have from criminality, then we are sending a message to other persons in society that they're not very safe, because when persons are able to generate significant resources from criminality, they could influence society. You mentioned you have an 18-year-old son, and he is still a vulnerable individual because he's just finding himself in society. Fortunately, he has a father in law enforcement who can guide him. Not everyone is going to be so fortunate, and a lot of young persons may be out there
very true.
looking at the guy on the hill with the big house, liming in the square, driving his SUV and saying, that is my role model. That's the person I want to become. I am from the jurisdiction of St. Vincent, and I recall, this is a story I tell over and over, going to school to make a presentation once. And there is a major drug trafficker, money launderer, we had convicted. And previously, he lined in the square, he had multiple vehicles, he had yachts. And one day he took his yacht to a beach party. And there was this young man there who was in secondary school. And he said when he saw this individual come to the beach on his yacht, he said, I want to be like him. That's exactly who I want my role model to be. Then we go into the school, we make a presentation about this case. And he said, now I understand that if I follow a life of crime, I am going to end up in prison.
Yes.
And all of my assets that I think I have control of, they are going to be taken away from me. So the rationale for the legislation is really so that vulnerable people, young, those persons without much economic power, would not gravitate towards a life of crime, and our societies in general could be safer. We may say crime involves drug trafficking. Drug trafficking may lead to the importation of firearms. The importation of those illegal firearms may lead to someone using it to commit a murder. Then we have an increase in the murder rate. The murder rate increase, then other members of society begin to feel uncomfortable, begin to feel unsafe, and we have a general sense of insecurity. So while we may focus on taking away the assets and ensuring that those criminals are deprived, it's about ensuring that all our persons, all our citizenry feel safe and secure, because we are clamping down and taking control on crime and removing the ability of criminals to continue to fund their criminality and their criminal enterprise, and any opportunity for them to expand.
Thank you very much.
So
Yes,
if you would allow me to just add just a little bit to it.
of course.
Again, the Proceeds of Crime Act, or the legislations throughout the Caribbean, are more or less mandated by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, right? The Caribbean derivative of FATF is what we refer to as CFATF, okay, based in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, what they do is that they assess the crime fighting capabilities of each Caribbean territory. It's done through a mutual evaluation, which means that your pair, so it might be St. Lucia and Grenada teams, would come to St. Kitts to assess your crime fighting capabilities. Now, where the Proceeds of Crime Act or legislation comes in is twofold. One is to protect the citizenry, and you're looking at economics, because you do not want your country to be built up or developed on crime or criminal assets or criminal funds. Because what would happen, persons would have been exposed or heard on the international news of the grey lists and the black lists, right? So if your country is primarily facilitating crime, so the banks are full of crime monies.
So, your economy
is built on crime, on criminality. When those countries are assessed and the international community deems you blacklisted, you lose funding from the IMF, you lose funding from the UN, and those would just cause a collapse, a complete collapse of your country. So that's one. Two, the Proceeds of Crime, again, is to protect you as a citizen, right? Because you would not want to be a hard-working police officer putting your money in Bank A, only for Bank A to be sanctioned and collapse. And you now can get no monies, because when they liquidate, the first thing that would be taken out is the monies to be recovered or recouped from the crime, right? Leaving the bank with maybe no monies left for liquidation. So you now, as a citizen, are destroyed financially, right? So again, the Proceeds of Crime Act is not just countries enabling or enacting it. There are over international law enforcement bodies that have mandated that these are critical pieces of legislation to protect you and to protect us, the wider, I would say, global economic forum.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Can you address and help people better understand money laundering, cash seizure, confiscation? We hear those words now and again, especially the word money laundering.
Yes, I will try to simplify. And again, you have your Proceeds of Crime legislation. What money laundering means is that an individual committed a crime. So he engaged in a robbery, he engaged in drug trafficking, he engaged in corruption. From that crime, he obtained some benefit. That benefit could be money directly, or it could be in the form of property, a cash, house, a vehicle, whatever it may be. Simple possession of those property would amount to money laundering, because now you have generated that. Your job is criminality, and from your criminal undertaking, you've generated monies, you've generated a benefit. That's money laundering in itself. Money laundering could become more sophisticated. You could try and conceal something. In other words, hide it, because you don't want law enforcement to realize that you've generated this from criminal activities, and you want to be able to enjoy it. You could disguise it in some form. You could convert it. You could import or export it. For example, if you're in a country A overseas, you may want to export your criminal proceeds to St. Kitts and Nevis, so you may want to put it in a bank here. That itself is money laundering. But in simple terms, you've committed a crime, you've benefited from that crime, and it is the benefit from that crime that is tantamount to money laundering. Cash seizure is a provision under the legislation that say if any person in St. Kitts and Nevis is found with cash, and that cash is suspected to come, and I want to emphasize this point, it's suspected to come from crime. So we don't want the innocent citizen. You're free to walk with your cash if you're innocent and got it lawfully. From your job as a police officer, from your job as a radio personality, you're free to keep that cash. But again, if you generated that cash from drug trafficking, from trafficking in firearms, from committing a murder, from theft, from robbery, the police, once they have reasonable grounds to suspect that, can seize that cash and undertake a process in the criminal justice system for the court to determine whether or not it came from crime, or there's another side, it's intended for use in crime. And once the court finds there's sufficient evidence of that, they can take that away from the individual. Again, undermining their capacity to continue in criminal activities, or undermining any incentive for them to continue in a life of crime. Because if you commit a crime for the purpose of benefiting, and that benefit is taken away from you, you have no motivation whatsoever to continue in criminality. So again, it leads to keeping the society safer, because less people see criminals as role models, less people hold them up on pedestals, and more people realize that anytime I benefit from criminality, whether that's money laundering, cash seizure, that's going to be taken away from me through a formal process of investigation, prosecution of the matter, and the judicial authorities making a decision that you should not profit from your crime.
Before you go on to confiscation, just a quick question for the listening audience. Police go and search a house. Maybe they're searching for drugs or whatever the case may be, and in the back of the room they meet 2 suitcases full of money. Full of money. Maybe almost $1 million, $500,000, whatever the case may be. And then they asking the owner, where you get those money from? He say, man, it's just my money. The police can take away that money, or the police would have to leave him with his money. He has no legitimate explanation, or whatever explanation he has, it doesn't really make any sense. I was washing cars, but he got $500,000.
No problem. We have heard, trust me, we have heard every single excuse. And with the exception of those that have not been constructed yet.
Okay.
But that is very dynamic. But just to address the two issues, money laundering, simply put, is getting something or something of a criminal or illegal origin and giving it the appearance of legitimacy. So it could be, like Mr. Williams said, it could be vehicles, it could be cash, it could be property, it could be jewelry. It's just giving it the appearance that it came from a legal or legitimate source, right? And it involves investigation to show the origin, and once you could satisfy the court that it came from illegality, it would qualify. Now, with the process of crime, the cash seizure issue you brought up, again, you have to exercise a level of discretion, even as a law enforcement officer. So persons generally ask, so are you saying that I cannot walk with $1 million in my pocket, right? Or if I walk with $500 in my pocket, police could just stop me and seize those monies. So I tell them no. The actual answer is no. Again, you have to look at the fundamental issues at play. Did those monies come from crime? And is it intended for use in crime? So if you went to the bank, withdraw $800,000 and decide to put it in a suitcase in your house, and police come to search, then police might seize it. But once you could satisfy the police that it came from your bank account, then you will
Once there's
have-
a paper trail.
Yes, once there is the legitimacy to the monies, then your monies will be returned. If there is a gray area where there is some uncertainty, then that would involve investigations. If the investigations show that at some point those monies came from crime or they were intended for use in crime, that is where the St. Kitts and Nevis government would have new monies to buy new vehicles. Right? To get new computers.
Yeah,
But again, as funny as it is, those monies are now put into the consolidated funds or the treasury, and they're used for society.
So in other words, the money will be taken from the criminals and put in the treasury.
and put into the treasury for use on government projects or to build back the communities, give back to communities, whatever program they so desire. Now, again, with Mr. Williams, there are a lot of technicalities when it comes to it, because again, the scenario you give could also be the money came from his bank account, but he was going to use it to buy drugs or to facilitate a crime. Now that also falls under the cash seizure, right, where the intention is to use it in
Okay.
furtherance of
So
crime.
the money might have come from a legitimate source,
but
it was his money,
Yes, but he was
the
going to
use of
use
that
it.
money was going to be illegal.
Correct.
Yes.
Wow.
Correct. So you see how powerful it is. So the proceeds of crime under the cash seizure regime looks at both the intended use and the derivation or the origin, whilst the money laundering focuses mainly on origin, where it came from, and that is the difference between the two. But both are intent or crux on taking out the profits, taking out the value of criminal activity.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Can you come? You guys are currently conducting a workshop on confiscation at the conference room of the Custom and Excise Department. Tell us about the workshop, what agencies are participating, and what are the proposed objectives of such a workshop.
Certainly. In relation to property taken away from criminals, I like to look at it this way. It would be beautiful for me to see a police car being driven down the street of Bastille, and on that police car it says paid for by criminals. I think that sends a powerful message. That sends a powerful message. But in relation to the workshop, we are focusing on confiscation during this week. The stakeholders involve all persons in law enforcement. So investigators from the police, including the white collar crime unit. We have the FIU, who is the central authority for receiving suspicious activity reports, Customs, Inland Revenue, as well as the Attorney General Chambers and the Director of Public Prosecution. So all of the players.
All those are represented.
Yes, all represented. So we're looking at from the cradle to the grave. For the point of suspicion, investigation, gathering the evidence, prosecuting and recovering the assets. Confiscation really, while it's a process, it happens upon conviction. So the person has been deemed by the judicial authorities to be guilty of the crime in question. Having been found guilty, the law now kicks in to say, did you benefit from your crime? So that's the question the judges will now have to answer. Did you benefit? What is the benefit from your criminality? And here's the thing. If you benefited, and we've ascertained the value, but you like nice time, so you made that suitcase with 100,000 or $1 million. The reason why you had it is that you were going to throw a lavish party, and that's all the benefit you obtained from your crime. So you no longer have proceeds that directly came from criminal conduct, but your grandma, who goes to church religiously every Sunday, gifted you or bequeathed you a house that's worth $1 million. Not from crime, completely innocent of all criminality as property. The law allows us to still target that house that was bequeathed to you by your grandmother. Legally, because what we are focusing on is your benefit from criminal conduct. So a criminal may think he's clever. I'm going to get some gifts from my parents, my grandparents, but I'm going to continue in crime and spend all of that money. No, the law says no.
So they can deduct.
Exactly. As long as you have any assets,
Can deduct.
we can deduct it to the amount of your benefit from criminality. And I think that's a very powerful piece of legislation. In addition, the law says if you fail to pay your confiscation order, because the order is made against you, the individual, then in addition to any custodial sentence, going to prison, that you did for the principal offense, so let's say the corruption, if you fail to pay the confiscation order but you have the means to pay it, you also go to prison for failing to pay. And it is not where you go into prison all at once for that. It is consecutive.
Consecutive.
Yeah, so after you finish serving your principal,
not concurrently.
not
Nope.
concurrent, not together.
Not concurrent.
It is consecutive. We want to
So
separate it.
you, if it was 3 years, you're not going to serve 3 years all together. You
No,
serve 3 years.
So 3 years.
And then the next
And
3.
when you're thinking,
Next
okay,
6.
it's time for me to go home. No. You have not paid your confiscation order. We want to motivate you to pay your confiscation order. So you're going back to prison now and serve a consecutive or continuing sentence. Yes. So it's a powerful motivation for the criminal to say,
Dynamic.
I have to pay this confiscation order.
Now, Grenville, I wanted to add the better part of that legislation. And again, like Grenville said, it's one of the most, if not the most powerful piece of legislation for law enforcement.
We have this legislation
Yes,
here?
we have.
Yes.
have this legislation
Right?
here.
In St. Kitts and Nevis. Causes of crime.
Confiscation.
Okay.
Right. So, like Mr. Williams explained, you must be found guilty. And when you say guilty, you have exhausted your appeal period and the court has deemed you guilty. Right? Only after a guilty verdict you could implement or advocate for confiscation. And again, it's not going after the property directly. You go in for the value of the crime. So I'll give a simple example. You convicted of drug trafficking. You had 10 pounds of marijuana in your possession. Let's just say the 10 pounds of marijuana is worth $100,000. Of course, law enforcement would take that marijuana and destroy it. So the argument would be, since I was not able to sell it because you took it, you destroy it, I did not benefit. But the law says no. And there is case law to prove that. At the material time you had it, it had a value, which is $100,000. You were not able to spend it because we had them take it. But the value of your crime is $100,000. So as such, the confiscation order against you will be $100,000. Yes. Even though the drugs are destroyed, even though police took it, and that would be your argument, the law has clearly identified it as you are not supposed to benefit. Right? Now, like Mr. Williams said, you might have a bank account with only $50,000. You might have your grandmother's property, which she bequeathed to you or she passed on to you, and it's worth $50,000. What the confiscation order or the confiscation regime says, you will have to give up the $50,000 there, plus sell that house your grandmother gave you to satisfy the order.
Which is 100,000.
100,000.
However,
So regardless,
however the government get that other $50,000.
yes, we
out of
need
you,
to get it
they're
because
gonna get
we
it
could
out.
show that you have property or assets with that value to satisfy the order. Now, Mr. Williams did not even give you the best part of breaching the confiscation order, which is after you are sentenced, in default, if you do not satisfy it, you go to prison. When you come back out, the order is still there.
It's still here.
So you still have to pay the $100,000 or else you go back to prison. Then when you come back out,
It's still here.
it's still there. So you need to satisfy it or else you go back to prison. So you see how powerful it is.
That's very powerful.
Very powerful.
I know certain legislations, something like maintenance, children maintenance, if they owe like $4,000 for not paying your child support, and or 14 days, you do the 14 days and that $4,000
It is
gone.
forfeited, so
You
it
understand?
does
You
not
start
work
again.
that way.
But,
Yes.
wow,
There-
you come
there's
back out,
no,
it's still
there's no reset. It's continuous.
Yes, under this one, it's continue to live as long as you've not paid it. So that, for example, if tomorrow you were to win the lottery and it's equivalent to $1 million, you cannot feel comfortable going and collect the prize because law enforcement could take that $1 million winning from the lottery to, when I say take, it's used loosely to settle your confiscation order because it's your obligation to pay the confiscation.
I have two more questions, but I have one particular question I want to interject. We're going to wrap up at 10. We got 10 more minutes. I must apologize to the listening and viewing audience that we won't be able to take any calls today, but this is a very important topic area. A lot of persons are smart, criminals that is, and they will not leave things in their name. They put it in their girlfriend name, boyfriend, whatever the case may be, auntie, uncle. Can that still be taken?
And you've hit the nail on the head. Most persons who engage in money laundering, that is exactly what they do. Because criminals are generally very smart. I mean, yes, there are some who are not too clever, but the majority are quite clever. Even to bring drugs into the country, you must have some modicum of understanding of how transportation works, how law enforcement works. So these people are clever. Corruption, same thing. So a lot of persons will try to distance themselves from the benefit obtained from criminality. So yes, they'll use a number of devices, putting it in the name of third parties, the girlfriend, the mom, the whomever. They'll also use companies sometimes. They'll also use trust facilities. The important point is that if we can identify that this property originated from criminal conduct, we can follow it wherever it goes. So if you give your third cousin, we could follow it into the hands of your third cousin and recover it from your... I mean, there's one exception. If your third cousin was not aware that you were involved in crime and paid you adequate consideration. So if there's a house for sale, the house is valued $500,000 and they paid $500,000 lawfully for the house, then we would not necessarily take that house from them. Right.
Yes.
However, if we see that they paid that $500,000, but there's no source for that $500,000, we will continue our investigation to determine whether or not Randy would have given you that $500,000 to make it appear that he was purchasing the house. So it doesn't matter where the property goes. The origin is from criminal conduct. We could follow it until we recover it, no matter the circumstances. Of course, that speaks to the complexity of investigations.
Yes.
And oftentimes people may wonder, why is this investigation taking years?
So long.
Because there are so many layers that we have to peel back like an onion to get to where the property is and to unravel all of the strings, unravel the web that would have been created around this property to give it an air of legitimacy that is going to take a considerable amount of resources, time, police officers, financial investigators, forensic accountants, all of those persons to contribute to solving the crime. But when we are successful, it's a good reward because we're able to say to that criminal, you did a good job in hiding it, but the police did an even better job
in
finding it and taking it away from you using the judicial system.
Yes, and you said you mentioned something very important, paper trail. So obviously you will want to distance yourself from the property, but look at a simple scenario. The vehicle that you're driving is in the name of your mother, right? Your mother cannot prove or show where she got the funds to buy the vehicle. Worse yet, an investigation might just uncover that your mother never had a driver's license. You're laughing. Never had a driver, never drove a vehicle in her life before. But the vehicle is registered in her name, right? And those are some of the things that you need to uncover as an investigator. And it doesn't matter how far removed it is. Once you could follow it, and you could shine a light on into the darkness, then the truth will come out, and those will be subject to proceeds of crime and confiscation.
It's very powerful. I got two more questions wrapping up on 5 minutes. How can recovered assets be utilized for law enforcement agencies, criminal justice practitioners, and the community?
This is more visionary for St. Kitts and Nevis. In some jurisdiction, the legislation is clear, and there is an allocation that is specified and set out in the legislation. For example, 5% would go to the magistrate's court, 5% to the director of public prosecution, 25% to community efforts at rehabilitation for drug or just building sporting facilities or whatever it is to ensure that the social fabric of society remains intact. In St. Kitts and Nevis, the legislation does not specify directly how the funds should be utilized, but the vision is the same. Again, that police vehicle driving down, it means we use the monies to purchase another vehicle for the police so that they can do their patrols, keep society safer. The training that's being conducted, if there is a cost to the training, Again, you invest in training law enforcement, criminal justice practitioners, so they're at the cutting edge of investigating and prosecuting. If you want to build a digital forensic lab, again, it could be supported in that regard. That's one element, the law enforcement element. The social element is important. Again, if you want to build a sporting facility, an appeal could be made to use some of those funds recovered from criminals to put a gymnasium in the community, to put a tennis court, to put a basketball court, whatever it is, a cricket field, whatever it is that we need. Also, there may be some persons who are adversely impacted by, let's say, using drugs. A rehabilitation center, that is something we could support. Young persons may have ideas in entrepreneurship that would allow them to move away from criminality and become positive role models, because you see a young person building a business, growing and demonstrating that you can do positive things. Again, resources could be used to support those young persons who are shining examples in society. And ideally that is what we want, because while we are targeting criminals, it's about providing an alternative, showing that there is a positive road that could be taken by persons and supporting those positive initiatives in society. If there's a program in prison where you offer development of technical skills so that when persons come out, they could find gainful employment, the resources could be utilized for that. In St. Lucia, in St. Vincent, there are a number of instances where several vehicles were provided to the police. Training has been provided. If you want a Coast Guard vessel, of course not one of the big ones, maybe the rib, that's a little bit more cost effective. You could purchase a rib, etc. But ultimately, it's when that money is removed from the hands of criminals, it's putting it to work against criminals, first for law enforcement, criminal justice practitioners, but also the social elements of society. This is a comprehensive approach and perspective.
Forgive me if I must ask this. We have this legislation here.
You have the legislation. It is not as precisely set out, but I'm sure that arguments could be made that when those funds are recovered, that it could be utilized for such avenues and appropriate use.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, I have one last question before we would open up for closing comments. What do you foresee or would like to see happen in the future within the region with reference to this area? Asset recovery.
No, I think I leave the diplomacy for Mr.
What I would like to see in the region is that we have a lot of awareness and education programs. So similar to your program here, where the public can listen and they become enlightened as to what are the positive things that they can do in society, how they can work with the police to make St. Kitts and Nevis safer. Yes, we want to target the criminality, but I think when we get to the criminal, we've already had a misstep. If we could have preventative measures where we have programs that allow people to channel their energies into positive undertakings, if people are aware that undertaking certain acts are criminal, assisting somebody to move criminal proceeds, that itself is an element of criminality. I think that's where I want to see the focus, where there is greater education, where there is greater focus on providing opportunities for upliftment and development for persons within the society. And of course, we are able to more effectively fund law enforcement on one side, but also fund the social and developmental programs on the other side, and ensure that young persons and other vulnerable persons in society have opportunities that are positive and that would keep them away from criminality. Because when you go home, you want to feel safe. When you're walking the street, you want to feel safe. And St. Kitts and Nevis has a big tourism sector.
Indeed.
We want to ensure that when the tourists come here, just like nationals, they feel safe. We want to ensure that our banks are not victims of money laundering, and therefore when we put our monies in there, it is safe. We are not going to be sanctioned. We are going to be part of the international financial community. No blacklisting, no grey listing, none of those. So a lot of education and insisting that, you know, we focus on positive development, and education and awareness helps significantly in that regard. Ultimately, of course, where we falter, we want a strong and comprehensive process of crime regime, and the best thing to demonstrate that we have a strong and comprehensive process of crime regime is to put the legislation to use. So we want to see the prosecutors applying for confiscation orders.
Put it to use.
We want to see the prosecutors building their cases around money laundering where appropriate. We want to see cash seizures where it is appropriate. So if you do contravene the law, we want to send you a clear message that crime is not going to pay by bankrupting the criminals.
Beautiful. And with that note, I would open up the floor for closing comments. Mr. Williams, Mr. Alexander.
Well, I think one of our main advocacy points would always be strengthening of law enforcement and again education. At the end of the day, the law or the legislations are there, and even as a law enforcement officer myself, you thought that ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? So you don't need something or somebody to tell you what the law says. You could read it, you could interpret it, and if you have issues, you could also get somebody to assist you in understanding it. But you see, until we end up pushing or advocating for education or sensitization, it will be a losing battle. Like I told you, it's like a revolving door. And I always tell, whenever we conduct our presentations, I always tell the law enforcement officers, think of it this way. You chasing somebody to arrest them, take them to court, and get them convicted, all on your time and effort. Then they go to prison to survive on your taxpayers' money, right? To come back out for you to start the whole process again. Whereas this could have been stopped by just educating yourself and using confiscation to just stop them at that point. So again, that is just my advocacy, that you educate yourself. You learn, you expose yourself to forums or trainings when they're available, and you build yourself or you build your department.
Okay, Mr. Williams.
Okay, the regional security system, the RSS, is here at your service. It is here to serve the 7 member states. Of course, we may expand in the future. We offer a lot of opportunities for law enforcement, criminal justice practitioners to enhance their capacity and skills. And one of the areas that I did not mention earlier is the support provided by the RSS Air Wing. COVID, the pandemic, hit us and it shut down most of our avenues of transportation, whether that's by sea or air. During the COVID, it was something new for us. We also needed to take our samples from here to Trinidad and Tobago to get tested to confirm whether or not somebody had or COVID or it was detected. And the RSS Air Wing, offered significant service over the last 2 years to St. Kitts and all of the other member states, flying many hours, taking those samples to Trinidad and Tobago, coming back to St. Kitts almost on a weekly basis. At one point, we had flights every 3 days coming to St. Kitts and all the other member states. So this is significant work that has been done by the RSS, done by the Air Wing, and I would like to commend all of those persons who contribute to that success, including the people and government of St. Kitts and Nevis, because we must work together to control COVID and all the elements. In 1989, I believe you were affected by Hurricane George, and we were able to offer humanitarian assistance and relief. In sum, what I'm saying is that the RSS is there for the member states to capitalize on, whether that's building capacity by attending training, participating in the training, where we offer humanitarian assistance and relief, where we offer opportunities to strengthen your domains, whether that is the maritime, whether cyber, whether financial investigations and asset recovery. And we want to strongly cooperate with all domestic agencies. Of course, we could only do so upon request, but what I'm saying is that we want to see those requests coming to the RSS, so we maximize the benefits and the opportunities afforded by RSS, which belongs to all of us as members of the RSS.
Okay, I want to thank you very much for coming, both of you guys. And now from here, you guys are going straight back into training.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank the persons who are listening, persons who are viewing, the viewing and listening audience. It's very good to know that we have these various legislations in the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis. And I would really, really like to see these legislation be used even more often. Because being a law enforcement officer myself for 25 years, it's disheartening to see that some criminals do benefit from it.
Oh yes, it's a business.
Right? And it's time that we take away that benefit. Okay, and I want to thank RSS for the extra effort in all this holistic approach in strengthening the member states in different legislative reforms and things of that nature. Okay, with that being said, I want to say GQ, thank you very much. Time and time again.
Thank
for
you
being
very
here.
much. Yes.
Right, I want to thank the ZIZ. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you guys and everything. Okay, so see you when I see you. GQ.
See you in the see, buddy. All the best.
All the best.
And be sure to stay tuned. Next week, we'll have another conversation for you, and hopefully the lines will be open that time for you to get in and maybe even share one or two questions as it relates to this conversation, I'm sure. Until next time, take care of yourself. The morning show is coming to your compliments. National Bank, always here. The Cable, Domino's, Courts, Smart Electronics, Beacon Insurance, and we'll be back right after these messages.
That keeps us separated.
Isn't it great when your experience pays off? Finally, Drivers 50